Thank you very much for actually having me here today. So that's my first slide to introduce myself. But one of the things I think that's important is that when we structured this symposium, we had a few things in mind. I was going to focus a lot more on study design, using cancer as an example, and then our next two speakers will be giving examples and opportunities to the audience here. And finally, Dr. Xu will be talking about analytical methods at the end, just to round things off in that way. So, to start off with, we need a definition of precision medicine. Now, this term has been moving along and changing over the past 10 to 15 years. It started off as pharmacogenetics and pharmacogenomics. It then moved on to having its name changed a few times over. But the principles are basically the same, regardless of what you call them. It's basically an approach to the way we handle disease prevention and treatment that are based on an individual patient's differences in their environment, genes, and lifestyle. So in a very weird way, I'm actually really talking about almost all of pharmacoepidemiology. Now this definition sets the stage for then how pharmacoepidemiology can contribute to precision medicine. So precision medicine is more of an approach, and pharmacoepidemiology is a discipline, and the two of them are tied together. A key component of precision medicine is the use of genetic information to improve therapeutic effectiveness of drugs and prevent potential adverse drug reactions. And so with that, we can't have a pharmaco any type of conference without a picture of a therapeutic window every so often. So here's a picture of a therapeutic window in here, where basically, at a certain concentration, you have benefit and effect of the drug. But beyond that, above a certain point, then you start to become or develop toxicity of the drug. And the therapeutic window is that gap from the dose that you get for efficacy to the dose you get for toxicity. It's a very wide range in most individuals. And there's a reason why to this extent. And that has to do with the fact that we all have a variety of variables that affect how it is that drugs affect us, and how we either metabolize the drugs, and how the drugs end up working on our targeted receptors, for instance. So translation, this is all the factors that would affect pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics. And the things that we're many times focused on are things such as compliance, and these may be related to social issues as to whether someone takes their drugs, economic issues, and cultural issues. It can also be differences in patient characteristics. As we know, metabolism may change with age, for instance. There are differences in how men and women, in some cases, deal with certain drugs, so gender, and certainly comorbidities, which might lead to also other types of issues, such as concurrent medications. So all of this is really to set up what the other speakers are going to be talking about in terms of examples. But when you're thinking about creating a pharmacogenomic study, a lot of what you're thinking about are the exact same things that you would think about if this was a regular pharmacoepidemiologic study. So 95% of the variables that you deal with are things that we should be comfortable with dealing with already. So that will also include potential exposures such as smoking, alcohol, concurrent medications. And what makes it different is the bottom portion of that list. The fact that we also are dealing with biological samples and specimens and data coming out from them. So precision medicine not only deals with being able to use our clinical and demographic parameters in order to help us make decisions on how to treat patients and individualize that treatment, but also in many cases the biological parameters that are associated with this. So it used to be our classic way of dealing with things is to look at the just at the genetics themselves. And classically, that's still what we normally do. The first thing that most of us think about is how do various genes or genetic variants that we carry can affect the way we metabolize genes, can affect the way that we absorb genes or excrete it, or the drugs that is, and then how it can affect how the drug hits its target. Having said that, more recently, we've been looking at other parameters as well, not only at the genetics, but at the epigenetics as well, and at other types of biomarkers that we can measure in the blood that might be the type that might change over time. Because our genes don't change over time, but many of these other markers do. And so that will also have a bearing when you're trying to design some of these studies. So I mentioned already about the wide range of factors that might affect how well a drug works. But the same range of factors can affect the toxicity of these drugs as well too. So if I were to put up a list of variables that might affect toxicity or adverse events, which many of us are focused on, it would be the same list. So again, as a result of this, what I'm trying to say is that a lot of what we focus on in pharmacoepidemiology are still the principles of the study design that we will utilize in any studies involving pharmacogenomics or precision medicine. The difference, as I said, is in the bottom half of that list, where we have to deal with the vagaries and the issues associated with dealing with biospecimens. So a classical basic precision medicine study, if you were to design one, is basically involving two areas. The first area is to collect primary data. And this would be the type of thing that we're all hopefully used to doing. So this is everything from information about your exposure, which in this case are your drugs, to all your potential confounders, and that would be the list I've mentioned before. But where it's different is that we now have to deal with figuring out how to collect biospecimens. And these biospecimens can come in a variety of forms. And you'll be hearing today examples of biospecimens that are collected from the blood, but also there may be biospecimens collected from tissue, urine, and sputum, and others as well. One of the reasons why this is important to keep in mind is this. So the couple of questions that I think you need to ask when you're developing some of these precision medicine studies is exactly what biomarkers you're interested in and the nature of the biomarkers. So in other words, if you're selecting a genetic variant, then you can pretty well collect the information from any regular tissue from the body. Blood just happens to be extraordinarily easy to collect. And you can analyze it because it doesn't change over time. Your genes do not change over time. And at the same time, it's the same genes in practically all tissues, short of obviously your sperm and your eggs, for instance. And so that makes it easy. But in some cases, our biomarkers are different. And part of the reason why this is the case is that there's some biomarkers that we're interested in that specifically change over time. So whereas the genes and the sequence of the genes don't change, the epigenetics can change over time too. So if you're interested in looking at potential biomarkers or epigenomics, and as an oncologist, this is one of the areas that's really big in terms of what we're interested in, then it will be really important for us to figure out when we're collecting the specimen. So what I'm coming down to then is not only do you have to consider what specimen that you're going to collect, but when you're supposed to collect it. So when you have very large databases and potentially collection of samples across many patients, across multiple centers, it's really important for you to then narrow down and figure out which specimens are the ones that you're interested in. The other thing that's going to be important to actually deal with is also the fact that what we describe as being blood and tissue is not just a single type of biospecimen. So blood specimens can come in different forms. There's whole blood, then there's plasma, and then there's serum. And each one of them provides different types of biomarkers and types of specimens. And not only that, but if you're collecting plasma, you should also specify, to some extent, what type of anticoagulant, what type of substances in the tubes that keep the blood from clotting. Because some of the assays and the tests that you want to use may vary, may only work in certain types of plasma specimens and not in others. So all of this becomes quite important to then think about when you're designing the actual study itself. So I've now divided into two portions. The portion of the study design that you should be familiar with, because as pharmacoepidemiologists, you're used to designing that type of study. And then adding on to it this issue of a new set of variables that has their own unique characteristics. So in terms of the basic steps, the first thing that I want to cover is the fact that you need to decide on your primary, secondary, and exploratory research questions. There are a lot of studies that actually start out there that say that we're interested in looking at precision medicine and we're going to look at a whole host of biomarkers. But like I said before, if you're not sure which biomarkers you're interested in, it may be that by the time you get to the point of figuring out what specimens you need, the data bank and the resource, the biorepository that you're using, may not actually have the samples you're interested in, or may have them collected at the wrong time points, for instance. So all of this then becomes important. The next few steps, in terms of identifying your potential confounders, is something that, again, we should all be familiar with when we're designing such studies as pharmacoepidemiologists. And we should be identifying both this ideal study population and the pragmatic study population as well. So all of those steps are pretty standard. When you need to get to the point of identifying the data and the biospecimen collection strategies, there will be, you'll be hearing examples today of several ways in which people have been collecting these such specimens. It is important to keep in mind these issues of the exact type of specimen, the timing of the specimen, but also the other things that we normally don't think about is the fact that usually when we're told someone is male or female, we don't worry about variation or measurement error. When it comes to a lot of the assays that we're interested in precision medicine, we need to keep that in mind. For example, in cancer, for instance, there is a way in which we can test hundreds, if not thousands, of mutations all at once from our patients. So Foundation Medicine, for instance, has an assay that's been around for at least 5 or 6 years. 6 years ago, it used one particular technique, and Foundation Medicine has changed it 46 times at last count since 6 years ago. So now the technology is now able to capture over 2,000% more in terms of number of genetic mutations than were previously able to collect from 6 years ago. So one of the problems is that when you're collecting then the information from those resources, for instance, you may think that, oh no, there doesn't seem to be a mutation listed here. Well, that might be because the mutation actually wasn't checked, because the technology keeps on changing. So that's the other aspect to keep in mind, is that when you're looking at information from databases that involve biospecimens that may have been performed over time, that the technology itself might change. The precision may have changed as well. And the accuracy of the test may have changed as well too. So in keeping in mind all of those things, it means that as pharmacologists and epidemiologists, you need to ask all those basic questions. So then, as epidemiologists, as study design gurus, then the issue becomes, what are the things that you need to ask if you're going to be involving biospecimens, which is the key to what we're talking about with precision medicine. So you should be asking about what the options are for sampling of the biomarkers to maximize the precision and accuracy of your test results. What are the validated tests that are associated, and are these tests optimized for the type of samples that you're dealing with? You would want to know, for instance, is it whole blood or plasma? Whether it's EDTA, citrate, or heparin anticoagulant, serum. Are you interested in lymphocytes, for instance? Or are you interested in urine sputum? Or right now in cancer, the big thing that we're really interested in, unfortunately, is feces. Because we're studying the microbiome. And feces is one of the easiest ways for us to figure out what type of bacteria are in our bodies at any one time. What are the options then? Another question to ask is, what are the options for the timing of the sampling? And so it may be in some cases you don't care about when you collect the specimen because it doesn't change over time. But in many other cases it does. And in cancer, for instance, even in tissue, you need to know if you're interested in germline tissue or regular tissue or interested in the tumor tissue. Some markers are only found in one and some are only found in the other. And you also need to ask what factors affect the quality of the test or the sample. So in other words, things that may affect the precision and accuracy of the tests that you want to do. And that may involve storage, processing time, the processing, whether it's the time it takes to process, the equipment used, the protocol used, shipping, temperature. I'll give you an example. I was in India last year where we were doing, they were just starting to do blood tests for a mutation called T790M in the plasma specimens. And when they first ran the test out, they realized that only 10% of their individuals had that mutation, whereas we were expecting about 60% to carry that mutation. And what we found was the fact that many of the samples were actually being shipped by commercial airplane, and India is very warm. So the fact of having it shipped at room temperature wasn't true. The samples were actually being shipped at a much higher temperature because of the heat, and that was actually destroying part of the samples as well. So those are things that you need to keep in mind that you normally might not even have to think about in this way. So then, you need to know whether, in some cases, whether samples are collecting fasting or not. And you need to know, for instance, who's actually taking the samples and what type of training do they have. It's very interesting, but there's such things called batch effects that if you keep on running, that you might find that certain centers are processing slightly different than others. And so you may end up having very different results as a result. So all of those things you need to keep in mind. And finally, you need to keep in mind patient convenience and acceptability, for instance. In some cases, it's really difficult to collect the specimens that you want to collect because it's going to be very invasive for our patients. And finally, to consider the cost effectiveness and the healthcare system acceptability. Because there are a number of tests right now that are out there that are quite extensive, but they're really only for research purposes only and cannot be actually expanded. As an example, 2 weeks from now, in Nature, our group will have published a new technique on how to analyze cell-free DNA to measure patterns of epigenomic changes in the blood. That technique has an area underneath the curve for diagnostic purposes of over 90%. It's sitting about 94% right now. We're very excited about this. Unfortunately, right now, 3 technicians in the world can actually run that test. And the training for those individuals has actually taken months. So we need to figure out how to change that test so that it can be applied across the board more universally, or else that test will not be useful. So with that in mind, these are the things to consider. Also consider consenting to make sure that in many cases, samples have been collected, but they haven't been properly consented for use in many of these secondary studies. Are there ability to share specimens or data in collaborations? As we all know, sometimes specimens can leave one country to the next, but not go the other way around. So we need to keep that in mind as well. Sometimes we want to publish this work, then it's actually required that you deposit all of your data in a publicly available data website to make it available to everybody once the data is out there and published. So in some cases, the consents that are used for patients don't include that, and that could be a problem. You need to understand in some cases whether the tests that you're doing whether there's commercialization capabilities involved, because that could have an effect on whether the samples could be used and tested or not from certain centers in certain countries. And then issues related to intellectual property also has to be considered as well. And finally, a very big thing that has been coming up in both North America and also in Europe, and I'm sure will happen in Asia, is once you have found relationships in precision medicine, then who actually owns the data and who actually owns the sample? Is it the patient? Is it the physician who actually recruited the actual patient? Is it the study itself? Is it the pharma company that's supporting it? Or is it, let's say, a large registry that's doing it? And those things are still being sorted out right now. So if you're planning on implementing design in your study, please keep these things in mind that otherwise you might not realize. And for many of you, you might think this is not an issue because different countries have different considerations involved. That's true. But we're finding more and more that in order to actually have adequate numbers of samples for analysis, we now have to share data across countries. And once that happens, all the rules of other countries start to kick in. So definitely keep that in mind. So then, to finally give a couple of quick examples of unanticipated issues. And these are things that have happened to us. We ran a study in which we collected specimens and we spun it down to collect a plasma. We found out 300 patients into the study that we were not actually spinning the sample long enough. We needed a double spin to make it plate the floor, and we didn't do that. So the first 300 samples in that study, we couldn't use to analyze one of our primary key variables that we're interested in. In another study, we were actually collecting white cells from blood and trying to keep them alive. And we found out that it was not only very costly, but the different technicians ended up with different levels of being able to keep those cells alive. I gave you the example of the shipping temperature that happened last year in India. Once we resolved that, the percent of people that carried that mutation went up to 50%, close to the 60% target that we were interested in. I talked a little bit about batching issues as well. Sometimes when you run tests, the tests vary from one day to the next, and the next day to the next day. So you have to be careful to make sure that you control for those changes. And for many of us, we may not run the test ourselves, but it's still your responsibility as the person designing the study and the person who's running the study to make sure that whatever laboratory you use maintains and keeps those quality controls. What had happened in India was the epidemiologists dealing with this had sourced this out to another company, to a commercial company, and not until we sat down to actually figure out the problem, because the commercial company kept on saying, there's no problem. There must be something different about the Indian, the population in India, that they don't carry these mutations. And we proved them wrong by actually demonstrating this way. So as the people who are designing these studies, you're also responsible to making sure that even those steps are carried through properly. And then to make sure that you monitor protocol variations across sites. This may be exceedingly important when you're dealing with biospecimens, even more so than when you're dealing with data. So I think I'll stop right there and say that hopefully this will give you something to think about when we start giving some examples from our next two speakers, and then with the analysis with our last speaker. Thank you.
I'm very honored to have the opportunity to introduce Chinese precision medicine. On behalf of our home mission, actually the topic is too broad to us. We can only talk about what we know by now. Every 5 years, the Chinese government will formulate the development plan of science and technology. The 13th 5-year plan includes a part of the health security. In this part, the government strengthens the development of 3 aspects, including precision medicine, the prevention of chronic disease, and the prevention of reproductive health and birth defects. In each of the 3 aspects, the government funded several major programs. The funding of precision medicine might include the following 5 areas, such as the cohort study of median population, the cohort study of man disease, and the precision medicine of disease prevention and treatment. The last part also includes some projects directly related to the pharmacogenomics. In the 3 aspects, the China government will fund a total of 3,200 million RMB, including more than 200 projects. Of the funded projects, there were 3 projects that were directly related to the pharmacogenomics, and the minimum amount of the project is 6 million. The first project, named Pharmacogenomics and Comprehensive Evolution System for Precision Drugs. This project will establish data sources for more than 5,000 samples with drug treatment and follow-up information. This project will also establish data on genetic distribution of efficacy and safety-related genes. The project will also plan to establish the gene detection technologies for more than 200 drugs. While the other project, named Study on Pharmacogenomics, targets a major chronic disease and its clinical application. The project will establish a database with information on drug treatment, follow-up, and multi-omics for major chronic disease. Except for the projects that were directly related to the pharmacogenomics, natural population-based cohort study may provide valuable data in future. To establish a median-level health cohort study for a representative natural population, the precision medicine funded 7 cohorts study. Each of the cohorts with more than 100,000 population. And the project will also funded a demonstrated cohort study with 200,000 population. The demonstrated cohort study will mainly relied on the CKB cohort, so-called China Cadore Biobank. This cohort consists of 0.5 million participants across 10 regions of China. The project will support the continued funding, continued follow-up of this cohort. In the CKB cohort, by now about 100,000 participants have been genotyped using a customized array. The array consists of more than 700,000 markers, and for the left, 400,000 samples will be genotyped in the following years. Based on the CKB data, we observed that there was significant difference of the genetic structure. Except for the cohort study on natural population, the government also funded several cohort studies of the man disease, such as the most common cancers in China. In these cohorts, detailed clinical information and biological samples will be collected, and part of these samples have been genotyped with arrays in previous GWAS or in the current GWAS study, such as the cohort study of lung cancer. In this study, we took part in this project. Actually, in 2011 to 2012, we performed the first GWAS study of lung cancer in Chinese population. Based on the GWAS data, we performed 2 pharmacogenomics research in non-small cell lung cancer. Recently, based on our previous study, we have genotyped more than 10,000 pair of lung cancer cases and controls recently. Based on these data sets, we identified several novel signs for lung cancer, and we also observed huge difference in genetic susceptibility of lung cancer between Chinese and Europeans. These results support the opinion that independent pharmacogenomics research in Chinese population is very necessary. Based on our GWAS findings in the Chinese population, we built a PRS with 19 SNPs, and we also validated the effectiveness of the PRS in the CKB cohort. We found that the PRS was significantly associated with lung cancer risk, and the PRS can help with population risk stratification, and the risk stratification is effectiveness in populations with different smoking levels. This data supports our opinion that PRS may provide more information compared to single variants. Part of the examples, part of these samples will be included in the cohort study of lung cancer. The cohort study is funded by the Precision Medicine Program. In the following years, more detailed information about the clinical treatments, toxic and side effects will be collected in the following years. According to the unified requirements of the Ministry of Science and Technology, this data will be shared by researchers in the future. Actually, by now, there were more than 300 GWAS studies have been published in Chinese population. This data may be useful in the pharmacogenomics research if we can collect enough clinical information. Besides of the precision medicine and the existing drug datasets, China government have established several medical health big data centers recently. These centers covering genetic data, demographic data, and clinical data. The first batch of national health and medical research centers were launched in Changzhou, Nanjing, Fuzhou, and Xiamen. We take an example for the Nanjing Jiangbei Health Medical Big Data Center. The first phase of the center was completed at the end of September 2017. In this big data center, personal health records and electronic medical records for more than 80 million people in Jiangsu province will be stored there. The image data from more than 100 hospitals will be stored in the big data center. And the big data center will also store the data for more than 1 million population. And all the data are the whole genome sequencing. Conclusion, in the future, available data for Chinese pharmacogenomics research will come from the precision medicine, the existing drug dataset, and big data centers. For precision medicine, the pharmacogenomics projects will provide directly available data. While for the cohort studies in natural population or the cohort studies of man disease, we need to link these samples into the electronic medical records and these samples need to be genotyped by further findings. While for the existing drug dataset like our lab, it needs deep cooperation of researchers. We can collect clinical information from the electronic medical records, but it needs further cooperation and particular proposals. While for the big data centers, it needs policy guidance and support from the government. Because I have to arrive at the high-speed train station before 3:30, maybe I cannot attend the following discussion. If you have any questions about this part, you can email us. Thank you for your attention.
I'm Linda from Peking University, and it's my great honor to be here to share the work about the genetic progression of adverse effect association with first-line treatment of tuberculosis on behalf of my professor. Let's recall some background knowledge about tuberculosis. Tuberculosis is a major global health problem. According to the World Health Organization, TB report, there was an estimate of 10 million incident cases and 1.6 million deaths in 2017. At the same time, China is the third highest tuberculosis burden country. In order to get a better control of tuberculosis, a standard chemotherapy regimen was introduced, which is a combination of several anti-tuberculosis drugs for 6 to 9 months. ATD-induced liver injury is one of the leading adverse reactions in tuberculosis treatment, which is concerning, which have some challenges in some treatment. According to our previous meta-analysis, the combined incidence rate of ATLI is around 12% in China. Within all of these first-line anti-tuberculosis drugs, isoniazid, rifampicin, pyrazinamide were the main drugs causing the ATLI. However, based on the difference on the mechanism, ATLI can be divided into acute hepatitis, cholestasis, and the mixed patterns. And the mechanism of ATD-induced liver injury is believed to be the accumulation of toxic intermediate from its metabolism This figure shows the status metabolic pathway of isoniazid in liver. In the hepatotic site, INH is first acetylated into acetylide isonazid via NAT, and then hydrolyzed into acetylide hydrolysin. Another metabolic pathway is the direct hydrolysis of INH into toxic hydrazine, followed by the acetylation into acetylide hydrazine. Acetylide hydrazine could be oxidized into hepatotoxic by CYP450 and then deoxified by GSTs. And as far as we know, both non-genetic and genetic factors have a significant effect on the susceptibility of ATLI. Non-genetic risk factors include host factors like age, race, sex, and etc., environment factors like alcohol intake and smoking, as well as drug-related factors. The genetic risk factors involve genetic variation in drug metabolism and transport, as well as immunological factors and antioxidant response. This is our study's objective, is to investigate the association between genetic polymorphism and the risk of ATLI in a population-based cohort in China. This is a figure of biotransformation of ATDs in the cell. We take phase 1, 2, 3 metabolism as well as immunological reaction into consideration in our study. The study population were recruited from the anti-tuberculosis drug-induced adverse reaction in China National Tuberculosis Prevention and Control Scheme Study, which is called ADACS for short. The ADACS cohort was to determine the instances of ATLI in China National Tuberculosis Prevention and Control Scheme and the harm to tuberculosis patients in China, which has begun in 2007. The primary or retreatment sputum smear positive pulmonary tuberculosis patients who will accept CNTS free treatment and willing to join the study was enrolled in this study. We used the stratified cluster and probability proportional sampling strategies, enrolled the patient from 52 cities of 4 provinces distributed in northeast, southeast, and southwest China. This figure shows the geographic map of the study field in ADAS cohort. And we can see more details about the study design of this cohort in this article. And for this study, the diagnosis of drug-induced liver injury was based on the criteria of international consensus meeting. Tuberculosis patients fulfilled the criteria were assigned into the case group. For each case, 4 controls were randomly selected and matched by the age, sex, treatment history, disease severity, drug dosage, and place of sample collection. Finally, a total of 89 cases and 356 controls from the ADACS cohort was included in our study. At the enrollment, eligible patients were interviewed with a questionnaire that collects the information on demography, medical history, comorbidities, diagnosis of tuberculosis, previous anti-TB treatment, and current use of medication. During the study, the patients were asked to take a list of physical and laboratory examination before the initiation of treatment and repeat the examination after 1 to 2 month treatment. The laboratory examination was included blood and urine routine test, liver and renal function test, and hepatitis B virus marker. We also reviewed the medical records to find more information about the patients. And also a drop of intravenous blood from the laboratory examination blood sample was taken and saved in the Waldman FDA card for future genetic analysis and DNA banking. The DNA from the FDA card was extracted, and after the amplification, used the PCR method to verify, and then used the Chapman method to detect the genetic polymorphism. The NCBI and SNP database was used to selection of the SNPs, and the TaxSNP approach was used when it is necessary. And this is the list of the genes and SNPs were included in our study covers the phase 1, 2, 3 metabolism and immunological reactions. In the end, 33 genes and 75 SNPs were included in the study. Hartree-Weinberg equilibrium was tested for the control group by a goodness fit chi-square test. Lasso regression was used to select SNPs significantly associated with ATLI. Genotype frequencies were compared in the ATLI patients and control groups by multivariate conditional logistic regression analysis with weight and usage of liver protective drugs and covariates. The association between selected SNPs and the risk of ATLI were estimated by the odds ratio with 95 confidence intervals. Here's the baseline characteristics, both of cases and controls. We can see that there were no significant differences were observed between the two groups in demographic parameters like age, weight, body mass index, and the baseline value of liver biochemical parameters. However, the peak AST, ALT, and the total bilirubin levels during the treatment were significantly higher in the cases than those in controls. In the genotype detection, a total of 445 blood samples were genotyped by Tachman method, and the success rate was reached 95%. The observed genotype frequencies for the selected SNPs in the controls were all in Hartree-Weinberg equilibrium, except for just 3 SNPs. And using the lasso regression model, we have 6 SNPs into the next study. The 6 SNPs was listed here. For example, the SLCO1B1 is associated to the drug transporter, and the ST83, IL6, HSPA1L have some relationship about the immunological reaction. In the genotype analysis, we found significant differences in genotype distribution of SLCO1B1, RS4149014, and HSPA1L, RS2227956 between patients with and without ATLI. In the logistic regression, we found 3 SNPs with the significant difference, which are patient carrying a GG genotype of RS414914 in SLCO1B1 were at lower risk of ATLI compared with TD genotype. And the patient carrying a GG genotype of RS105303 in the ST83, a TD genotype of RS2066992 in IL6, or the CT genotype of RS2227956 in HSPA1L were at a higher risk of ATLI. This is our result. We identified 4 SNPs associated with ATLI. We found that the drug transporters and immunological reaction may play a role in the development of ATLI. In our study, we employed a nested case control study design and used a matching approach to control the potential compounders and to increase the statistical power. But because we just enrolled 89 cases and 356 case controls in our study, maybe the small sample size can have some influence on our interpretation of the result. Also, because the tuberculosis treatment is a combination of several drugs, so we cannot tell which drug is leading to the ATLI. For the conclusion, we found genetic variant in SLC1B1, ST83, IL6, and HSPA1L may be associated with the development of ATLI in Chinese population. We hope this result can help in the further research of mechanism of ATLI and maybe the evidence of the prevention of ATLI and maybe individualized treatment of tuberculosis patients. These are some work published in the journals earlier of our team, and that's all for my presentation. Thank you for your listening.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the invitation from the organization committee. So today I'm trying to outline the statistical methodology and analysis models on the pharmacoepidemiology research. So as most of the people may think about statistics may only be used for the statistical modeling and analysis, but in fact statistics is more than that. In the pharmacoepidemiology research, statistics can be used starting from the study design, the analysis plan, the data collection, monitoring, to the quality control and summary, and then we go through the statistical modeling and analysis. And then, of course, for the final presentation and how to interpret the results. You see, Dr. Liu just gave the introduction for the design. In fact, we have been working together for more than 10 years on the pharmacogenetic research. I think we spend more than 50% of the time to discuss on the study design and analysis. Because that, to me, is the most important to determine how success will be your future study. When the data come to us for the analysis, in fact, our help is limited. But more important for us is we design the new study in a high quality. The statistical design, as the people introduced already, so basically can be split into the discrete study and the analytic study. So usually we focus on the analytic study, and in fact, the analytic study can be separated into observational study and experimental design. So for the observational study, including the basics such as the case control study, the retrospective cohort design, the cohort study for the prospective collected information. So most of this observational study usually is to assess the risk factor related to the clinical outcomes. So this clinical outcome can be diagnosis, can be prognosis, can be personalized development for the predicting model construction. And then for the experimental study, usually is for the clinical trials, which they help to develop the new treatment strategy. Besides the study design, the other important statistical input is to estimate your sample size and to conduct a power analysis. So this is very important for clinical research. Is they have two extreme situations. Is if the study is underpowered, which means you don't have enough sample to answer the most important research question, and at the end you may give the improper inference. On the other side, if you collect too many samples, you may waste your limited financial resource or the human resource. But how to conduct the sample size and power analysis, it depends, of course, on the structure of the study. So, and also depends on the methodology you're going to use for the analysis. So that's why when we think about the study design, we have to think about what's the potential statistical methodology we're going to use for that specific study. And we need to compare the advantage and the disadvantage of different statistical methodologies we're going to use for this type of research. So of course, for example, the diagnosis assessment, the prognostic assessment, the predictive model construction to assess the potential biomarker to the treatment interactions, all these different methodologies, the sample size requirement is totally different. And then, of course, the other important aspect of the sample size calculation and power analysis is how to choose the proper significance level alpha. So, majority of the studies, people still use the 0.05 as a magic number as the significance level alpha. However, for some of the specific studies, these can be different. So, for example, the early phase clinical trials, your significance level alpha can be a little bit loose, like 0.1, 0.2. Or sometimes even it's one-sided. But on the other side, for genetic research, especially for the genome-wide association study, you can imagine when the number of testing are involved, the multiple testing comparison is a big task for us to consider. So to avoid inflated potential type 1 error, we have to use a little bit more stringent criteria. The sample size calculation and power analysis, in fact, is two-sided. So if you have a fixed sample size, you want to conduct a power analysis. But if you don't have your sample size, you want to base on your specific criteria for your statistical power to estimate how many sample size. So that's why we have the power analysis and the sample size calculation. And then after you determine how many samples you are going to use for your study, we may need to consider the potential power, especially for some of the cancer research, the patients may not complete their follow-up. So that's why to avoid to underestimate the required sample size, you may need to give a little bit of room for your study design. And then on the other side, the variability for the measurements, especially for the continuous outcomes, is a very important aspect for a sample size estimation. And to be a little bit more complicated, this variation of the outcome sometimes is beyond the variation of the measurement itself. For the longitudinal measures, we may need to consider the correlation between the repeated measures. And then, of course, the most important thing for sample size calculation is the effect size. And this is a very strong assumption. And this assumption usually is not just based on statistical judgment. We need to have very close communication with the clinicians to make sure that we have the smallest meaningful the differences to be clinically meaningful. And then statistical analysis plan. After we estimate the sample size, after we calculate the power, we have to write the detailed statistical analysis plan. In fact, for some of the large-scale clinical trials, this analysis plan can be very complicated. So as some of the translational research dealing with the high-dimensional genetic or genomic data. But on the other side, some of the observational studies can be quite straightforward. Here, I just try to give some outline for the analysis plan. So starting from the summary statistic. So summary statistic seems quite easy, but summary statistic can give you the rough idea of the data structure, can give the range of which type of the important information captured for the key variables. And then, of course, study analysis involves the treatment comparison if you involves the treatment decision. Universal analysis, quite useful, especially for your dimension of the risk factors is pretty high. You want to identify the potential candidate risk factors to build up into your further multivariate analysis modeling. And then we go to the multivariate analysis to sometimes build up the baseline clinical models. And in addition to that, we may need to add the genetic biomarkers to construct a more comprehensive predictive model in addition to this clinical baseline model. The risk factor identification and the predictive model construction is a little bit different concept. Risk factor identification is usually to assess which type of the clinical risk factor or the genetic markers are potentially related to your clinical endpoint. But the predictive model is trying to predict what's the potential outcome. So for predictive model, usually you need to have a little bit more detailed analysis plan to try to build up your analysis model. Because this model maybe is you coming from a very high dimension of all the potential candidate biomarkers, but then at the end you want to find out the final model which can provide the reliable predictability. This construction is not the end of the study. Usually after you construct the predictive model, you should have either calibration or validation to verify these developed predictive model are generalized for the general population. It's not just limited to your own study. And then after that, sensitivity analysis and subgroup analysis, which is to try to assess the robustness of the model performance and how to deal with the heterogeneity of your collected data to see if your conclusion can be applied on specific conditions for your research topic. Then let's deal with the specific type of data. So here I give a very, very simplified case for discrete variable, which is either ordinal or nominal. Continuous variable, I guess we encounter the most. Blood pressure, height, weight, BMI, age, quality of life, all these are the continuous measures. And then time to event outcomes. So in cancer research, we encounter lots of these time to event outcomes, such as overall survival, progression-free survival, time to recurrence, time to toxicity, or sometimes maybe it's not specific to time, for example, like dose toxicity. But that can count as a survival data as well because it's also related to sensory information and complete events. But things can be more complicated. So for example, for some of the recent microbiome research, we encounter this type of the information is called operational taxonomic unit, the OTU. And these OTU counts are not exactly continuous. They have a large number of zeros. So they have large number of zeros and then they have this counting process. So how to deal with this type of the quite unique distribution of the variable. On the other side, sometimes your outcome may not be a unified distribution. So for example, for toxicity research, you may encounter the toxicity combined of potential discrete variables and continuous measures. These discrete variables including maybe the skin rash, the diarrhea, and the continuous variable may be related to your WBC, hemoglobin. And then if you want to assess the treatment effects on the toxicity profile, you may need to deal with this mixture of the variables with the continuous and discrete measurements. And then for the different type of data, we need to identify what's the optimized statistical model. This is quite important. Sometimes people have some knowledge on statistical model, and then they just try to find the data can fit with the model. I know how to use it. But in fact, research is in a different way. You understand your data better, and then you try to identify the optimal model. In fact, sometimes for some of the specific research topic, the existing methodology may have their limitation. That's why, as the biostatistician, we have the responsibility to develop something new, which can model specific type of data the best. And then on the other side, the different type of variables can be transferred in from continuous to discrete, but this kind of transformation also should be cautious is because the specific categorization of the continuous variable involves how to choose the potential cutoff. And then, no matter which kind of cutoff you use, you may have the potential loss of information and may damage your statistical power. So that's why when we deal with the research, we have to be very careful for this type of different assessment. The quality control of the clinical data is very important for the success of your final story and your analysis, because any kind of simple mistake may cause you make the false inference and the wrong conclusion. So the quality control, in fact, is quite a comprehensive work. It involves the data merging from different data files, especially now for the translation research. We have the clinical data file, we have the genetic data file, we have the other type of the gene expression data file, or maybe we have other microbiome data. How to harmonize these different databases together? You don't want to duplicate your data, you don't want to delete some of the useful information. And then maybe you want to check the sample duplications. And this is quite often happen in the clinical research. The same patients, because they use different study ID, has been entered in the study several times. So how to identify this potential problem? Formatting checking is so important for the analysis is because we really want to make sure that the data you collected are consistent between clinical centers to clinical centers. Because some of the specific database, they may have their specific format for the same variable, but on the other center maybe use a different formatting. When we do the merging, we use the program. Program is not as smart as people because we can judge based on our judgment, but program just follow their specific rule. And if that seems formatting inconsistently happens, you maybe lose some of the important information. Distribution checking, and this is the key for the outcome assessment, because you want to make sure that your outcome is follow some of the certain distributions you are designed for your analysis. If your outcome distribution is different to your expectation, you have to think about how to change my statistical models, or maybe I have to think about to design a different way to deal with this type of data, or maybe I have to ask myself what happens, what drives that information. Summary statistics is usually very useful for the quality control of the clinical data. So especially for the missing pattern control and for some of the outlier checking. For example, for age, if you see some outliers say age is 200 years, that means something wrong. Maybe it's a typo, or maybe it's the formatting problem. So after we do the quality control, the first thing we do for the research usually is just provide our typical table 1, summary statistics. This summary statistics is not just to summarize the key information we have. is also help us to identify the specific condition of our study. So which kind of distribution for our key variables, what's the difference between your case and controls, and what's the difference between your key conditions of maybe treatment or maybe exposure. Other useful tool for summarizing information including the box plot, which is very simple. If you want to compare the mean differences, you can always use box plot, which is compare the median, which provide the first quartile, third quartile, provide the minimum and the maximum. And then, of course, histogram. I have one colleague, Dr. Andrew Patterson, which is a genetic epidemiologist. He always emphasizes to draw the histogram before you do any of the analysis, because the histogram tells you that the potential distribution of your most important variable, especially for the outcomes. You want to make sure that you understand the distribution of your variable, then always you can draw the histogram. Scatter plot, very simple plot, but this can be very useful to assess the correlation between two continuous variables to see if they have positive correlation or negative correlation. Kaplan-Meier curve. Kaplan-Meier curve is very useful for survival data for sensory information. This can be used to calculate the survival probability at any time points for your follow-up of the study. Besides that, the Kaplan-Meier curve also can estimate a very important statistics called median survival time, which is the certain time points related to the survival probability at 50%. In fact, when we do the analysis, the Kaplan-Meier curve is also very important because, for example, for this specific Kaplan-Meier curve, you can see the two specific conditions the Kaplan-Meier curve have to crossover. If that happens, the Cox proportional hazard assumption maybe is violated. Then, when you start to do the analysis, you will consider don't use Cox model. You have to be using some other type of statistical methodology. So, how to model the continuous data? I started with something very simple: correlation. Correlation is to assess the strength and the direction of two continuous variables. So, this correlation can be from -1 to 1 is the strongest negative correlation to the strongest positive correlation. Keep in mind is the correlation coefficient have two types of calculation. One is called the Spearman correlation coefficient, one is called the Pearson correlation coefficient. The Pearson correlation coefficient is based on the normality assumption. So that's why make sure that when you assess the correlation, you want to check the distribution. If the distribution is not follow the normal distribution, maybe you can use the Spearman correlation coefficient. The correlation can also deal with the multivariate independent variables. That's called partial correlation. So for example, if you want to adjust by some of the covariates, you can calculate your outcome Y to your main predictor by using the partial correlation coefficient to adjust by the other covariates. Okay, correlation is for two continuous outcome. And then how about Y is continuous but Y is categorical? So a typical example is the t-test. T-test is to compare the mean differences between two subgroups. Very simple. But how about more than two subgroups? We can use the ANOVA test. But keep in mind, t-test, ANOVA test are all based on normal distribution. But if it's not, how can we do the assessment? We can use non-parametric way. We can use either the Wilcoxon the Rankson test, or we can use Kruskal's test, which is for multiple categories. Linear regression. So this simple formula tells us how to conduct a linear regression. We have multiple predictors and we have a continuous outcome Y. So linear regression, in fact, is very simple to understand, and it is straightforward to understand the meaning of the regression coefficient. The strong correlation coefficient, which means the strong association of the predictor to the outcome. But I want to emphasize here is for the linear regression, if the dimension of K is large. So for example, if K is 10,000, but your sample size is limited, maybe only 100, so these may encounter some of the problem of you have the biased estimation of the regression coefficient. So if that's the case, you have to think about different statistical methodology. Like just our previous presenter gave the example for the lasso. So lasso is the penalized regression is to deal with if your dimension of predictor is high, how do you conduct your regression assessment? On the other side here, I only give just a linear combination of the k different predictors, but how about their interactions? So interactions can be two-way interaction, can be three-way interaction. So if you want to consider to build up some of the reliable predictive model, maybe you have to consider to incorporate these the two-way, three-way, or even high order of the interactive term into your model. Let's put continuous outcome, and then how about categorical data? Categorical data, of course, the most commonly used, the non-parametric test is chi-square test, Fisher exact test, or using logistic regression. So logistic regression is very useful to assess the risk factor association to the binary outcome. But how about our outcome is not binary, but multi-categories? So like ordinal variable. So you can always use a little bit different way. You can use generalized logistic regression. But on the other side, logistic regression can be also used for the other research as well. For example, logistic regression can be used to build up predictive model, such as a nomogram, which is for the clinical outcome prediction. Or on the other side, logistic regression can also be used to match your samples. Even your outcome is not your targeted clinical outcome, but you can use your treatment as your outcome, and then you can create a propensity score to match your potential samples. Besides logistic regression, the other statistical methodology for the binary outcomes is we call the decision tree model, or we call the classification tree model. The idea of this methodology is to identify the subgroup, and then you can predict events or no events for these specific subgroups. Of course, now with the technology development, the decision tree now improved into the random forest, in the backend tree, all these different type of the data mining technology. So, regression model can be used to assess the association between the risk factor and outcome. But on the other side, for some of the clinical research or translational research, predictive model construction is so important. And we want to evaluate how good the predictability of such developed model. How to assess this type of ability? Usually for the binary outcome, we can use the area under the curve, the AUC. But keep in mind, AUC concept in fact is not that complicated, but sometimes people use it in a little bit different way. So for example, the AUC interpretation for the case control study should be very cautious. Because for the case control study, your event has been enriched. So that's why you estimate predictive models AUC, maybe it's overestimate. And then after you construct your potential predictive panel on the general population, usually you won't see such kind of high AUC. And that's because of the design of the study. And then how to model the sensory data? Sensory data like the survival data, like what I just give the example, the time to toxicity, time to progression, or even dose to toxicity. So three different ways. The first way, of course, is quite commonly used is the non-parametric method, including the Kaplan-Meier curve, logarithmic test. Parametric way, we can use specific assumptions of the duration to the events as certain distributions. So, for example, exponential distribution, wave distribution, or generalized F distribution. So, in clinical research, parametric model is not that commonly used. Is because the justification of such specific distribution is always difficult to justify. So that's why people like to use the semi-parametric approach, the cost proportional hazard regression model. The cost model basically is to write your hazard function as two components. The first one is we call the base hazard function, the H0T, and then the other component is the risk factor effect to your main target. So the estimated regression coefficient in fact is the logarithm of the hazard ratio. And that logarithm of the hazard ratio tells you the strength and the direction of the association. But cost model is based on a very strong assumption of the the proportional hazard assumption. So that's why the checking of this assumption is very important, and currently is largely ignored by most of the research in the survival analysis. And for the ghost model regression, you can see here, I give some of the example for one of the study we conducted here is to working on different risk factors. The one thing I want to emphasize here, you can see here from this plot, we have two different p-value here. One is the pairwise p-value, which is for the multiple categorical variable. So that pairwise p-value is to compare specific category of that variable to a reference category. And then we have this global p-value. The global p-value is to evaluate the overall association of that variable to main outcome. And then besides the Cox model, you can use a survival tree model. Survival tree model, similar to the decision tree, is to identify subgroup, but of course the target is a little bit different. This identified subgroup should have either very good performance on survival or have very poor performance on survival. So in that way, you can use this survival tree model to identify high risk or low risk category. In fact, we developed some methodologies even beyond that. Beyond using the identified high risk and low risk on the survival performance we call prognostic tree model, we also developed some predictive tree model, which is to assess the potential risk factors interacting with the treatment on the survival outcome. And then longitudinal data. Longitudinal data is quite commonly encountered in cancer research on the quality of life studies. So for each individual, we have repeated measures for the multiple quality of lives. So the model we used for the longitudinal data, including the mixed model regression, which is used for the continuous outcome. And then we can use generalized estimation equation model, the GE model, which can be more general for the binary outcome, the ordinal outcome, or the counting data. And then another quite interesting topic is how to combine the longitudinal data into the survival analysis. So this involves the model of survival outcome with longitudinal predictor, and we can consider including the time varying covariance into the model. Meta-analysis is quite useful. I saw lots of the posters in our meeting are dealing with the meta-analysis. I'm quite happy for that, is because nowadays, when the research is getting more complicated, we always have limited financial resource to collect the individual data. So that's why how to pull the results from multiple existing studies and joint conclusion becomes important. But the key element for the meta-analysis is the quality of your selected study. So you want to make sure that your selection criteria is very solid and the quality of each of the selected studies is very high. Okay, some take-home message. Statistical methods are important for clinical research and the treatment decision, and different statistical methods and models are conducted on study with specific data type and research questions. And besides the classic statistical model, data mining and machine learning methodology can be used for research as well. Thank you.
A quick question. We saw that with the technique involvement, the cost of the genotyping has been going down dramatically. But in terms of the study design and also statistical method, if you look back from past 10 years or 5 years, are there any significant progress regarding the study design and also statistical method for those precision medicine molecular epidemiology studies? Thank you.
I can start off by talking a little bit about the study design method. The types of samples that are being collected, the overall study designs are still somewhat similar, regardless of whether you're dealing with 10 genetic variants or 1 million genetic variants. Or right now, the big question is the cost of sequencing down low enough that we can basically do exome sequencing or whole genome sequencing? And those costs are coming down as well. I think the bigger question is how are you going to analyze all of that data? So I get to hand it over next to the person who has to deal with that issue.
Okay, so I think that's a very good question. So the cost of the research goals are how to design the proper studies to answer the specific research will become quite important. So, for example, we'll just give the example. Okay. So, about the academic sequence study. So, even the technology improved dramatically during the last 5-10 years, but still the cost of the whole genome-wide sequencing on the individual is still quite costly. So we are thinking about how about we design this type of design. We call it two-phase design. Is we can use some like candidate gene study or maybe genome-wide association study as the study, and then we can assess the enrichment of the association to the outcome, and then we can focus on the identified region or identify the enriched phenotype to target on the sequencing for the next step. So in that way, we can think about how to save the cost of reconduct the research on the targeted subpopulation of the subphenotype. So in that way, maybe it will help us not to go through too high dimension of the potential candidate in spectral space, but we can still have some answers very close to our the real research results.
I think we experienced from the candidate gene strategies to the pathway strategies, and then because our somehow is the blood clot, we cannot do the GWAS, so we stopped here. But in future, your just mentioned is very important. If we have the sequence, the studies, we can find some maybe some positive, but we have to do the identify the association. Yeah, so maybe return to the pathway. But I have a question for you. You know the analysis. Usually we do the analysis between the T and the A. There are a lot of the multiple comparison. Yeah. So how to set the significant? Maybe we can use usually we can use the 0.05. But if we face to the multiple comparison, if we use if we do the Bufferoni adjustment, we get the result is the false, not the true association. So I think we can give us the suggestion. Yeah.
That's a very good question. So for translational research, we encounter this type of problem quite often because our dimension of the liquid space can be quite high. It depends on different dimensions of the liquid. It can be genomic, it can be gene expression, it can be multiple biomarkers. So if we don't consider the comparison of the comparisons, then the inflation effect is a major concern, because then your main conclusion maybe is the first positive, and then you don't give the right conclusion. But how to justify the comparisons? They have three, I think to me, they have three major approaches. The first approach, of course, is just to simplify the adjustment. So basically, we just using the 0.05 divided by the testing pattern. But this is oversimplified and maybe it's too conservative, because the underlying assumption of the Bufferoni adjustment is assume the test is multiple testing are independent tests. However, we know that most of our biomarkers are correlated, especially for the genetic studies. Because of the high LB between the genetic markers, then the independent assumption may not be correct. So in that way, we have to think about a different approach. People develop different approaches called first is calibrated adjustment and FDR adjustment. So of course, FDR has a lot of versions, but this to me at least gives you some of the potential improvement compared to Bufferoni adjustment, which is too conservative. And for genome-wide association, in fact, I remember the 2007's classic paper on the epigenetic genome-wide association said the 5 different stages criteria. This criteria is based, take into account the development structure of the genetic markers across the whole genome and the concentration. So in that way, you have some standard for the genome study. But of course, now the genome study is not that popular compared to the genome study. But we can consider this kind of idea to develop some specific criteria for specific study. The third approach is what we call effective number of tests. So which is taking into account the correlation structure between your dependent testings. So in that way, for example, if you have 1,000 genetic markers, but after you calculate the effective number of tests by using the component algorithm, maybe the exact number of tests you try to adjust is 200. So in that way, you compare with the optimal adjustment, you still have the potential
We've probably got time for one more question if there's any from the audience.
I have a question for Professor Liu. Since you mentioned that your slide the temperature of the test or the sample will seriously affect the quality of the test. Do you think it's necessary to monitor the temperature of every single sample or test, or just monitor the whole batch of samples enough?
Sure. Yeah, so that's actually quite a good question in order to clarify what I was trying to say. What you need to understand is basically the nature of the sample that you're collecting. So for instance, germline DNA, if it's in the form of germline DNA, is quite stable at most temperatures for long periods of time. In fact, that's and so that itself is not so much of an issue. But in many other cases, if you're looking at, for instance, cell-free DNA, for instance, for which you could be doing the same types of genetic analyses, that is extraordinarily sensitive to high temperatures, and so you have to be careful. So the key thing is you need to know what it is you're measuring. You need to know what sample it is that you're collecting, and then make your decisions on whether some things like temperature is important, or whether spin speeds are actually important as well. So even though the other speakers here have really focused on one of the most stable things that we are collecting, which is germline DNA, one of the things we have to think moving forward is the fact that I think over the next few years we're going to find such things as cell-free DNA is going to become quite important. It's already becoming quite important right now. We're using it to actually diagnose one of the most common secondary mutations in lung cancer, which is T790M. And so as we collect these data on an ongoing basis, we have to have a better understanding of how the quality of the sample, the quality of the processing can affect our results.
Let's ask a follow-up question to that, because we did, sort of many years ago, I was involved in setting up a biobank, we actually ran a whole experiment of looking at different methods of sample storage, processing, how long they were on a bank between the clinic and the hospital, and freezing. How important is it, do you think, for people setting up these sorts of studies to do that type of validation or that type of quantification and recording? Because of the future use and reuse in the assays is...
The short answer is extraordinarily important. I'll give you a quick example. The Nature paper that's coming out 2 weeks from now uses samples from 12 to 14 years ago because it took time for us to collect all of the samples that were necessary. So when we were going to actually select our samples, we went back to figure out which had the shortest needle to freezer times, which were actually processed within a certain time. So having that information is useful because in some cases it won't matter. So if I know that it doesn't matter, I'll use the samples that have been sitting there for hours and days, right? But when it does matter, I don't want to screw up the assays that are associated with it. So the bottom line is recording and collecting and validating and double checking how things are is really important. As another example, every year we take a certain number of viral samples and we do EBV transformation. That's simply to make sure that they're still viral.